On a cold morning, the entrance to a charity event becomes the stage for a national scandal. In front of the cameras, a pregnant woman is brutally assaulted by someone who was once her employee and is now the lover of her politician husband. As the country watches in shock, the husband's complicit silence sparks an unprecedented revolt. But when the truth comes to light, justice, resistance, and rebirth take the place of silence and pain. The biting cold of that July Sunday in London made the air even heavier around the Grand Exhibition Centre. Marina Kensington adjusted her scarf over the yellow dress she had chosen with such care the night before, feeling the weight of her 7-month pregnancy with every step she took towards the main entrance. Her fingers trembled, but not just because of the temperature. There was something in the air that morning that made her uneasy, a feeling she couldn't name but which had pursued her since she woke up. The charity event organized by her husband, State Senator Richard Kensington, promised to be the biggest of the year. Posters announced the fundraising campaign for charities supporting underprivileged families, and the press was out in full force covering every movement of the morning. Marina knew she needed to smile for the cameras, wave to the journalists, and portray, alongside Richard, the perfect image of the political couple. It was the role she had played for 5 years, ever since he decided to enter public life with the discourse of transforming the city into a better place. But lately, that role weighed more heavily than the baby she carried. Marina noticed Richard's distant glances, the conversations that stopped when she entered the room, the whispered phone calls he took on the balcony late at night. Distance was growing between them, a silent chasm she tried to fill with the hope that the baby's arrival might reconnect them. After all, it was the couple's first child, the baby they had planned for so long, and who was supposed to represent a new beginning for both of them. As she ascended the marble steps leading to the main entrance of the exhibition center, Marina felt a sharp pain in the side of her belly. She paused for an instant, taking a deep breath, and that's when she heard the voice, a young female voice that cut through email. The cold air like a sharp blade. Charlotte Norton stood at the top of the steps, elegant in an impeccable black suit that contrasted with her carefully styled blonde hair. Marina recognized her immediately. Charlotte had been her personal assistant for almost 2 years, the efficient and dedicated young woman who organized her schedule, answered her emails, and accompanied her to social engagements. 6 months ago, Charlotte had resigned, claiming a better offer in another city. Marina had even missed her company, the way she anticipated her needs before she even had to ask. But the Charlotte who stood before her on that icy Sunday was not the same solicitous assistant as before. There was something different in her gaze, a hardness Marina had never seen. And there was more. Charlotte was not alone. She carried an expensive handbag, wore a watch Marina recognized, because she herself had commented to Richard about that specific model weeks ago, a watch that cost more than Charlotte could afford on her assistant's salary. "Marina, you look so beautiful pregnant," Charlotte said, but the tone of her voice carried no affection. It was sarcastic, almost cruel. "It must be exciting to expect a child, isn't it? Especially when you're so sure who the father is." Marina's heart pounded. She looked around and realized that several people had stopped to observe the scene. Cell phone cameras were already pointed in their direction, and a local news cameraman adjusted his equipment to capture what was happening at the building's entrance. Marina tried to pass Charlotte, but the young woman blocked her way. "Excuse me, Charlotte. I don't know what you want, but this isn't the time," Marina said, trying to maintain her composure. Her voice came out shaky, betraying the nervousness she felt. "Not the time?" Charlotte gave a bitter laugh. "Of course it's the time, Marina. It's exactly the time. Do you think you can live in this perfect bubble while I stay in the shadows? Do you think you deserve this life, this marriage, this baby?" Marina felt tears sting her eyes. She didn't understand what was happening, but a part of her, the part that had been ignoring the signs for months, began to comprehend. Charlotte wasn't there by chance. This wasn't a casual encounter. It was deliberate, planned, cruel. "What are you talking about?" Marina asked, though she already knew she didn't. "Want to hear the answer? I'm talking about your husband, Marina, the man you think you know, the man who has been sharing a bed with me for over a year." Charlotte took a step forward, invading Marina's personal space. "That watch you're looking at, It was a gift from him, as is the apartment where I live, the car I drive, and every promise he made me about the future we would have together. The crowd around them grew. Marina could feel their heavy gazes on her, the buzz of conversations intensifying. Where was Richard? Why wasn't he there? Beside her, refuting all this madness. Marina searched for him with her eyes, desperate, and finally found him. He was at the building's entrance, standing still, observing everything with an expression she had never seen. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't indignation. It was something worse. It was guilt. "Richard!" Marina cried, her voice breaking. "Tell her she's lying. Tell her!" But Richard didn't move. He just stood there, frozen, as the cameras turned to him too. His silence was more devastating than any words Charlotte could have uttered. It was the confirmation Marina didn't want, but had already expected deep in her soul. "You see, Marina," Charlotte whispered, now so close that Marina could smell her expensive perfume, the same one she used to wear. "He won't deny it, because he can't, because everything I said is true. And you know what's worse? He promised me he would get rid of you, that you were a mistake he needed to correct." "Liar!" Marina cried, trying to pull away, but Charlotte gripped her arm tightly. "It's true, and you know it. You always knew. You just didn't want to see." Charlotte pulled her cell phone from her pocket and showed Marina the screen. It was a series of messages between her and Richard, dozens of them, filled with intimacy, promises, and plans. Plans that included a separation, a carefully constructed public narrative about Marina's emotional instability, and a future where Charlotte would occupy her place. Marina felt the world spin. Her legs buckled. The pain in her belly returned, more intense this time, and she instinctively placed her hand on her abdomen, protecting the baby. "No," she whispered, "it can't be true." But it was, and everyone was watching. The humiliation was public, broadcast live, captured by dozens of lenses that would turn that moment into a national headline. Marina Kensington, the perfect wife of the rising state senator, was being destroyed before the entire country. And her husband, the man who had sworn to love and protect her, watched it all in silence, allowing it to happen. The air around Marina seemed to have grown denser, as if she were submerged in icy water. Every breath hurt, every heartbeat echoed in her ears like a distant drum. She needed to get out of there, needed to find a place where she could process it all away from the curious stares and relentless cameras. But Charlotte still blocked her path, and the crowd had formed a semicircle around them, turning those marble steps into a cruel stage. "Let me pass," Marina pleaded, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, Charlotte." "Please?" Charlotte repeated, a bitter smile on her lips. "You were always so polite, so perfect. The Marina Kensington everyone admires, the dedicated wife, the exemplary future mother. But do you know what Richard told me about you? That you were boring, that living with you was like living in a prison of perfection where he couldn't breathe." Every word was a blow. Marina felt tears streaming freely now, no longer caring about her undoubtedly smudged makeup or the image she needed to maintain. None of it mattered anymore. Her life, everything she knew and believed in, was crumbling before her eyes. It was then that Marina saw her brother. Gabriel Spencer, a federal prosecutor and Army veteran, had just arrived at the event. He was at the bottom of the steps, trying to push his way through the crowd, blocking the passage. Marina could see the confusion on his face as he tried to understand what was happening, why his sister was at the center of such an uproar. "Gabriel!" Marina cried, extending her hand towards him, as if that gesture could save her somehow. "Gabriel!" But her voice was lost in the murmur of the crowd. Gabriel was still too far away, still trying to get past the people who were pushing each other for a better view of the spectacle unfolding at the exhibition center's entrance. Marina saw, when he finally understood, that it was she who was at the center of the confusion. She saw the exact moment panic took over his face. Charlotte followed Marina's gaze and saw Gabriel approaching. Something changed in her expression. Her confidence wavered for a moment, replaced by something that looked like despair. She looked back to where Richard was still standing at the building's entrance, and Marina followed her gaze. She saw when Richard's and Charlotte's eyes met, saw a slight nod from him, an almost imperceptible gesture, but one that carried some meaning Marina couldn't decipher. "You don't understand, Marina." Charlotte turned her attention back to her, and there were tears in her eyes now too. "He told me no one would care about you, that you were strong enough to move on, that it would be better for everyone if you just got out of the way." Marina felt a wave of nausea. Get out of the way. What did that mean? She looked at Richard again, searching for some sign of humanity, some indication that this was all a nightmare from which she would wake. But Richard merely watched, motionless, as if he were attending a play and not the destruction of his own wife. "I was at home when you called," Marina began, her voice trembling but firm. "Remember when you said you had an emergency and needed time off? I gave you the day. I always supported you, Charlotte. I treated you like family." "And that's why it hurt so much," Charlotte replied, wiping her own tears with the back of her hand. "Because you were too good, too perfect. And I couldn't compete with your perfection, so I took the only thing you thought was yours alone." Marina felt something break inside her. It wasn't just her heart. It was something deeper, more essential. It was the trust she had placed in the world, the belief that people were fundamentally good, that love was real. Hand promises meant something. All of it was being torn from her at that moment, on those icy steps under the merciless gaze of hundreds of strangers. Gabriel was closer now. Marina could hear him shouting her name, could see the determination on his face as he unceremoniously pushed people aside. But Charlotte saw him too, and it was at that moment that everything changed. It was at that moment that the despair in Charlotte's eyes transformed into something more dangerous. "Everything he promised was a lie, wasn't it?" Marina said, and it wasn't a question. It was a realization. Suddenly she understood. She understood Charlotte's anger, the pain behind that cruelty. "He used you just like he's using me now, just like he uses everyone." "Shut up!" Charlotte screamed, and her voice echoed through the walls of the exhibition center. "You don't know anything. You don't know what it's like to love someone who will never be completely yours." Marina took a step back, instinctively protecting her belly with both hands. The baby had begun to stir, as if sensing its mother's tension. "Charlotte, please, no matter what happened between you and Richard, no matter what he promised you. But this here," she said, pointing to her own belly, "this is innocent. Please don't make this become something even worse." But Charlotte was beyond reason. Marina could see it in her eyes. There was a fragility there, a brokenness that was already complete. Charlotte was not the villain of this story. She was another victim, manipulated and used, turned into a weapon to destroy Marina's life. And now, faced with the possibility of losing everything, faced with the reality that Richard would never leave Marina for her, Charlotte was crumbling. "He said you would lose your balance," Charlotte whispered, almost as if talking to herself. "He said it would be an accident, that no one would suspect, that you would fall and everyone would think it was just a pregnant woman stumbling on the steps." Marina's blood ran cold. She looked at Richard again and saw the truth stamped on his face. The pallor, the growing panic. He hadn't expected Charlotte to say that. He hadn't expected her to reveal the plan, but Charlotte was beyond protecting him. She was destroying herself and taking Richard with her. "Gabriel!" Marina cried again with all the strength she could muster. "Gabriel, help me!" Gabriel was only a few feet away now. His expression transformed into pure terror as he realized what was about to happen. He stretched out his hands, trying to reach his sister, shouting for people to get out of the way. But it was too late. Charlotte, in a moment of absolute despair, of anger directed not at Marina, but at herself and the choices she had made, raised her leg. The movement was swift, impulsive, and her foot struck Marina on the side of her abdomen. It wasn't a violent kick, it wasn't the brutal act of someone intentionally trying to hurt. It was the uncoordinated gesture of someone who had completely lost control, who was drowning in emotions she could no longer process. Marina felt the impact. She felt her body lose its balance. The low heel she wore wasn't enough to keep her stable, and gravity did the rest. She fell backward, her arms flailing in the air for support that wasn't there. Time seemed to slow down. Marina could see the horror on Gabriel's face, could hear the screams of the crowd, could feel the cold marble approaching faster and faster. And then the impact, first on her back, then on her head. The steps were hard and unforgiving. Marina rolled, her body unprotected, her belly hitting the marble as she tumbled down. 5, 6, 7 steps. Each impact was an explosion of pain. And then, finally, she stopped. On the ground, at the bottom of the staircase, her body motionless. Marina's last conscious thought, before darkness enveloped her completely, was about the baby, about the life she carried within her, and which was now in danger. She tried to move her hands to protect her belly, but her body didn't respond. And then, there was nothing left, just the black silence that swallowed her whole. Gabriel Spencer had seen many terrible things in his life. As a federal prosecutor, he dealt daily with the worst aspects of human nature. As an Army veteran, he had witnessed situations most people only knew through movies or news reports, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for seeing his sister fall down those steps, her fragile, pregnant body hitting the unforgiving marble. "Marina!" The cry tore from his throat as he finally managed to break through the barrier of people separating him from her. He ran the last few feet and knelt beside his sister's motionless body, his trained hands immediately checking her pulse, her breathing, looking for signs of serious injury. "Marina, answer me." But Marina didn't respond. Her eyes were closed, her face pale as the snow that never fell in London. A small patch of blood began to form beneath her head, and Gabriel felt panic threaten to overwhelm him. "No," he whispered, taking off his jacket and carefully placing it under her head. "No, Marina, you can't do this to me. Wake up, please." Around them, chaos had erupted. People screamed. Some tried to help, while others just filmed with their cell phones, perpetuating that moment of horror forever in the world's digital memory. Gabriel heard someone shout that an ambulance had already been called, but he knew every second counted. Marina was unconscious, 7 months pregnant, and had fallen from a considerable height. The risks were immense. Gabriel looked up and searched for Richard. He found him still at the building's entrance, now surrounded by security guards and aides who seemed to be trying to move him away from the scene. The state senator was pale, but he didn't move. Towards Marina. He didn't run to help her. He didn't scream for help. He just watched. And at that moment, Gabriel felt something he had never felt before, a rage so pure, so absolute, that it threatened to consume all his rationality. "You!" Gabriel shouted, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You did this! You and that woman!" Charlotte was still at the top of the steps, now with her hands covering her face, sobbing uncontrollably. Gabriel could see her trembling, could hear her broken denials. "It was an accident," she cried. "I didn't mean to. I didn't want this to happen." But Gabriel had no compassion at that moment. There was no room in his heart to understand Charlotte's pain or the circumstances that led her to that point. All he saw was his sister, unconscious on the ground, and all he felt was the urgent need to make someone pay for it. The ambulance arrived in minutes that felt like hours. Paramedics took control of the situation with professional efficiency, checking Marina's vital signs, immobilizing her neck and back before moving her. Gabriel held his sister's hand throughout the process, whispering promises he didn't know if he could keep. "You're going to be okay. The baby's going to be okay. I promise, Marina. I'll take care of everything." As the stretcher was lifted and they began to move Marina towards the ambulance, Gabriel finally stood up. His knees ached from crouching on the cold marble, but he barely noticed. His attention was split between his sister and the man who should have protected her. Richard had tried to approach, but Gabriel blocked his path. "Don't you dare," Gabriel said, his voice low but laden with menace. "Don't you dare come near her." "She's my wife," Richard responded, trying to sound firm, but Gabriel could hear the tremor in his voice. "I have the right to accompany her." "Right?" Gabriel gave a bitter laugh. "You lost any right over my sister the moment you allowed this to happen. I saw you, Richard. Everyone saw you. You were standing up there watching and you did nothing to stop it." "I didn't know she was going to do that," Richard protested, but his defense sounded weak even to his own ears. "I thought they were just going to talk." Talk? Gabriel pointed to the spot where Marina had fallen, to the small trail of blood that still stained the marble. You call that talking? And everyone here heard what that woman said. She said you promised no one would care, that Marina would lose her balance, that it would be an accident. Richard paled even further. That's not what I said. She misunderstood. She was emotionally unstable. But Gabriel was no longer listening. He turned to the police officers who had arrived with the ambulance. I want that woman arrested, he said, pointing to Charlotte, who was still on the steps, now being restrained by security guards. And I want a full investigation into what happened here. All security cameras, all cell phones that recorded, everything. Sir, you can't give orders here, one of the officers began, but Gabriel interrupted him. I am Federal Prosecutor Gabriel Spencer, and what happened here was an attempted assault on a pregnant woman. You will investigate every second of what happened, or I will personally ensure that everyone involved in this negligence is held criminally accountable. Is that clear? Gabriel's tone left no room for argument. The officers nodded and began to cordon off the area, collect statements, and request recordings. Gabriel watched as Charlotte was handcuffed, still crying, still screaming that it had been an accident, that she hadn't wanted to hurt anyone. He saw when Richard was surrounded by reporters, all shouting questions about what had happened, about his relationship with the woman who had attacked his wife. But Gabriel didn't stay to watch the circus that was unfolding. He ran after the ambulance, getting into the vehicle before they could close it. He held Marina's hand again, watching the paramedic connect monitors to her, check her blood pressure, examine her belly for signs of trauma. Is the baby okay? Gabriel asked, his voice finally breaking. Please tell me the baby is okay. The paramedic exchanged a worried look with his colleague. We need to run tests at the hospital to be sure, sir, but fetal heartbeats are present. That's a good sign. Gabriel nodded, swallowing the tears that threatened to fall. Marina had always been the strong one between them. When their parents died in a car accident 5 years ago, it was Marina who kept Gabriel on his feet, who prevented him from losing himself in drink and anger. It was she who encouraged him to continue his career in the public prosecutor's office, who believed he could make a difference in the world, and now it was Gabriel who needed to be strong for her. During the journey to St. Jude's Hospital, Gabriel pulled his cell phone from his pocket. His hands trembled as he typed, but he had to do it. He needed to document everything while it was still fresh in his memory. The glances exchanged between Richard and Charlotte, the words Charlotte had said. Richard's lack of reaction. Every detail was important. Every fragment of information could be crucial to ensure justice was served. At the hospital, Marina was immediately taken to the obstetric emergency unit. Doctors and nurses surrounded her, shouting medical instructions Gabriel barely understood. He was gently but firmly ushered out of the room, forced to wait in the corridor while the professionals did their work. Gabriel paced back and forth, unable to stand still. Every minute felt like an eternity. He compulsively checked his cell phone, watching notifications explode. The video of the fall was already going viral. Hashtags about the case were already trending nationally. People were outraged, shocked, demanding answers. And then finally, a doctor emerged from the room. Gabriel rushed to him, searching for any sign on the man's face about Marina's condition. She's stable, the doctor said, and Gabriel felt his knees buckle with relief. But the trauma was significant. We had to induce a coma to reduce brain swelling and protect both her and the baby. The next 48 hours will be crucial. And the baby? Gabriel asked. How is the baby? For now, stable. But we'll monitor constantly. Any change, and we'll have to make difficult decisions. The doctor placed a hand on Gabriel's shoulder. Your sister is strong. She will fight, and we will fight with her. The hospital waiting room had become Gabriel's headquarters for the past 24 hours. He had slept there in an uncomfortable chair, waking at every sound of footsteps in the corridor, waiting for news about Marina. Doctors entered and left the obstetric ICU, always with serious but professional expressions, always saying the same thing. Stable. Critical, but stable. The words had become a mantra Gabriel repeated mentally, trying to find comfort in them. But Gabriel wasn't just waiting. During the hours Marina fought for her life and her baby's life, He worked. His laptop was open. On his lap, emails being sent and received, contacts being activated, the machinery of justice being set in motion. Gabriel knew he couldn't prosecute the case personally due to conflict of interest, but he could ensure the best professionals were involved. And he could, using his position and connections, ensure the investigation was conducted with the rigor it deserved. It was early Monday afternoon when she appeared. Beatrice Maxwell was an investigative journalist Gabriel knew by sight. She had covered some of the most important cases that had gone through the public prosecutor's office in recent years, always with an ethical but relentless approach. Gabriel had seen her at the charity event, working as a reporter for a local network, but hadn't had time to think about it after everything fell apart. Prosecutor Spencer, Beatrice approached cautiously, respecting the difficult moment but clearly determined. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Gabriel looked up from his laptop. He was tired, with deep circles under his eyes and unshaven, but his mind remained sharp. "What do you want?" he asked without hostility, just with the exhaustion of someone who had spent the last 24 hours in hell. "I was at the event yesterday," Beatrice said, sitting down in the chair next to him without waiting for an invitation. "I saw everything that happened, and I also saw some things others didn't." Gabriel closed his laptop and turned to her completely, his attention now total. "Continue." Beatrice pulled her own laptop from her bag and opened it, turning the screen so Gabriel could see. It was a recording, but not from the angle Gabriel had seen in the viral videos. It was from an internal security camera, positioned to capture the entrance of the exhibition center. "I want you to see this," she said, pressing play. The recording showed Richard and Charlotte talking, 15 minutes before Marina arrived. They were in a corner, partially hidden by a decorative column. Richard gestured as he spoke, and though there was no audio, his body language was clear. He was instructing Charlotte about something. She shook her head, seemed hesitant, but he kept talking, growing more insistent. Gabriel felt anger surge in his chest again. "How did you get this?" he asked. "I have my sources," Beatrice replied, "but that's not all." She fast-forwarded the video. "Look here." At the moment of the attack, Gabriel saw the scene that was already etched in his memory. He saw Marina on the steps, Charlotte confronting her, the crowd gathering. But from this angle he could see Richard clearly. He could see that the state senator wasn't just passively watching, he was observing, calculating. And when Charlotte looked at him searching for something, Richard had given that small nod. Gabriel hadn't noticed it at the time, his attention completely focused on Marina. But there it was, captured in high definition, a nod of approval, a silent permission. "He authorized it," Gabriel whispered, feeling bile rise in his throat. "That son of a bitch authorized her to attack Marina." "There's more," Beatrice said, her voice grim. "I gained access to Charlotte's phone records. Over the past 3 months, she and Richard exchanged over 500 messages. Most were deleted, but a data recovery company I work with managed to restore some of them." She opened a digital folder and began to show screenshots. The messages were devastating. Richard not only maintained a relationship with Charlotte, he actively conspired to get rid of Marina. There were discussions about how to make Marina appear mentally unstable, about spreading rumors that she was violent and unstable, about using the pregnancy as a tool to force her into involuntary psychiatric treatment. Gabriel felt sick reading it. "My God," he murmured. He was planning to commit her. He wanted to declare her insane. "And there are mentions of money too," Beatrice pointed to a specific message. "Richard transferred £200,000 to Charlotte over the past 6 months. Officially, these were payments for consulting services through a shell company. But there's no evidence Charlotte provided any legitimate service." "Bribery," Gabriel said. "He was paying her to destroy Marina." "Not just that," Beatrice hesitated before revealing the next piece of information. "I found something else. Richard was embezzling funds from a domestic violence prevention foundation, the same foundation that sponsored yesterday's event." Gabriel closed his eyes, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. It wasn't just personal, it was criminal. Richard not only betrayed his wife, he used money meant to help victims of violence to finance his scheme to destroy his own wife. "Why are you showing me this?" Gabriel asked, opening his eyes and facing Beatrice. "You could have done an explosive story with this information." "Because this goes beyond a story," Beatrice replied, closing her laptop. "This is about justice, and I don't trust that the system will work properly if someone doesn't apply pressure. Richard is a politician with connections. He's going to try to cover it all up. He's already started, in fact." She showed her phone where a recent news report spoke about how the state senator was distraught over his wife's accident and how Charlotte was an unbalanced woman he barely knew. "Lies," Gabriel snarled. "All lies." "Exactly. That's why I'm here. I'm going to publish this information, but I want you to be prepared. I want you to have copies of everything, that your colleagues in the prosecutor's office are ready to act the moment the story breaks. Because Richard will deny everything. He'll try to sue me. He'll use all the power he has to silence the truth." Gabriel extended his hand. "Give me everything, every file, every recording, every document, and give me 24 hours before you publish. I need to get things organized on my end. Ensure that when the storm begins, we'll be ready for it." Beatrice nodded and began transferring the files to a flash drive. While waiting, Gabriel looked towards the ICU door where Marina was fighting for her life. He thought of all the times Richard had sat at the dinner table with them, smiling, telling jokes, pretending to be the perfect husband. He thought of how Marina defended Richard when Gabriel expressed doubts about his sincerity, how she genuinely believed he loved her. "He's going to pay for all of this," Gabriel said, more to himself than to Beatrice. "Every lie, every betrayal, every second of suffering he caused my sister. He's going to pay for everything." When Beatrice left, Gabriel held more than just evidence. He had a bomb about to explode, something that would not only destroy Richard's career, but would put him behind bars for years. Gabriel spent the next few hours meticulously organizing everything. He sent copies to trusted colleagues in the prosecutor's office. He contacted the judge overseeing the case. He ensured every I was dotted, every T was crossed. It was when he was finally about to try to get some sleep that his cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. Gabriel hesitated but answered. "Prosecutor Spencer." A nervous male voice spoke from the other end. "My name is Charles. I work in security at the exhibition center. I need to speak with you, sir." "I'm listening," Gabriel said, immediately alert. "I have an audio recording." Charles's voice trembled. "From the moment of the attack. The cameras don't capture sound, but my radio equipment picked it up. I was close enough and my microphone was on. There's something in this audio you need to hear." Gabriel sat up straight. "Meet me at the hospital in 20 minutes. And Charles, bring witnesses. I want what you have to be officially documented." When Charles arrived, accompanied by a lawyer and a notary, Gabriel listened to the recording, and what he heard confirmed his worst fears. In the recording, clearly, Charlotte's voice said exactly what Gabriel suspected. "You said no one would care about her." The words were clear, impossible to deny. Gabriel had everything he needed. Video evidence, recovered text messages, financial records, and now an audio recording. Richard Kensington had nowhere to hide. When Beatrice Maxwell's story aired on Tuesday morning, the country stopped. It wasn't just another news story in an endless cycle of political scandals. It was a punch to the gut of the national consciousness. The security, camera footage showing Richard talking to Charlotte before the attack, the text messages detailing the plan to destroy Marina, the financial records proving the embezzlement of funds intended to help victims of domestic violence, and the audio, that devastating audio where Charlotte revealed Richard's exact words. "You said no one would care about her." Within hours, social media exploded. Hashtags like "Justice for Marina" and "Are Yellow Ribbons" dominated the trends. People began to wear yellow ribbons on their clothes, in their profiles, in their homes. The color of the dress Marina wore on the day of the attack had become a national symbol of resistance against violence and manipulation. Spontaneous demonstrations formed around the Grand Exhibition Center, where hundreds of people laid yellow flowers on the steps where Marina had fallen. Gabriel watched it all from the hospital, still keeping vigil by his sister's side. Doctors had said that Marina would remain in an induced coma for at least another week, perhaps 2, depending on how her body and the babies responded to the trauma. Every medical bulletin was a roller coaster of hope and fear. The baby is fine today. Marina's brain functions are stable. But tomorrow, who knows? Gabriel's phone wouldn't stop. Ringing. Journalists wanting interviews. Colleagues from the prosecutor's office offering support. Women's rights organizations asking him to become a spokesperson for a larger cause. Gabriel refused most requests, focused only on ensuring justice was done and that Marina had the peace necessary to recover. But there were some calls he couldn't ignore. One of them came from the Attorney General himself. "Gabriel, you've done an extraordinary job gathering this evidence," the grave voice said over the phone. "But I need you to understand something. Richard Kensington has powerful friends. I'm already receiving pressure to soften the charges." Gabriel felt rage boil in his veins. "Soften? My sister is in a coma. Her baby might not survive, and you want to soften? It's not what I want, Gabriel. It's what they want. But listen, I'm going to assign my best team to this case. We're going to prosecute Richard and Charlotte with the full force of the law. I just need you to trust the process." Gabriel looked through the glass window into Marina's room, seeing her motionless body surrounded by machines and tubes. "I trust justice," he said finally. "But I'll be watching every step if I feel they're trying. To protect Richard, I'm going to make it public. Understood?" "Understood. And Gabriel, take care of your sister. Let the prosecutor's office do its job." Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Richard Kensington faced his own hell. His political office had been raided by investigators. His bank accounts were frozen. His political supporters had vanished like rats fleeing a sinking ship. And the media was camped outside his house, shouting questions he couldn't answer without further incriminating himself. Richard's lawyer, a 50-year-old woman named Dr. Helen Carlyle, was one of the country's best criminal defense attorneys. But even she was struggling to find a viable defense. "Richard," she said during a meeting in her office, surrounded by documents and recordings, "you need to understand the gravity of the situation. The evidence against you is overwhelming. The best course of action is to negotiate a plea bargain." "A plea bargain?" Richard exploded, his carefully constructed composure finally shattering. "I'm innocent. That woman acted alone. The text messages say otherwise. The recordings say otherwise. The audio says otherwise." Dr. Helen pushed a pile of documents towards him. "Richard, you instructed Charlotte to confront Marina. You transferred money to her. You embezzled funds from a charity foundation. There's no denying these things." Richard buried his face in his hands. "How did this happen?" he whispered. "How did everything fall apart so quickly?" "Because you underestimated the power of truth," Dr. Helen replied without pity. "And you underestimated Marina's brother." Charlotte, in turn, was in a cell at the police station, awaiting her own bail hearing. She had tried to take her own life on the first night, using her shoelace. A guard had found her in time, and now Charlotte was under constant surveillance, medicated and fragile as glass. When prosecutors finally managed to interrogate her, she completely broke down. "He promised me everything," Charlotte cried, the words coming out broken between sobs. "He said Marina was an obstacle, that when she was out of the way, we could be together, build a life, have a family. I believed him." "And what exactly did he ask you to do on the day of the event?" the prosecutor asked, gentle but firm. "He said to confront her, to make a scene. He said Marina was fragile, that she would easily break under pressure, that after the public embarrassment she would accept an amicable separation." Charlotte wiped her eyes with the back of her cuffed hands. "But when I got there, when I saw her in that yellow dress, so pregnant, so perfect, something in me broke. I realized he was never going to leave her, that I was just a tool." "And the push, why did you do that?" Charlotte closed her eyes, tears streaming freely. "I don't know. It was a moment of madness. I was angry. Angry at her for being everything I would never be. Angry at him for using me. Angry at myself for being so stupid. And when she was there in front of me, She opened her eyes, looking directly at the prosecutor. "I just wanted her to feel a fraction of the pain I was feeling." The testimony was video recorded. And although Charlotte's defense team tried to keep it confidential, claiming their client was mentally compromised, someone within the judicial system leaked it. The video spread across the internet within hours, and public outrage reached new heights. Social movements organized coordinated protests in all the country's capitals. People marched peacefully, carrying banners with phrases like, "How many Marinas must fall until we understand?" And violence is also manipulation. Women's rights activists gave emotional interviews, using Marina's case as an example of a systemic problem. "It's not just about one bad man," a feminist leader said at a press conference. "It's about a culture that allows powerful men to destroy women without consequences." Gabriel watched it all with mixed feelings. On one hand, he was grateful for the public support. The pressure was forcing the system to act quickly, to not allow room for political maneuvers that could protect Richard. On the other hand, he knew his sister would hate being turned into a symbol. Marina had always been a private person, who valued her autonomy and didn't like to be defined by her suffering. It was on the 5th day after the attack that Gabriel received the call that would change everything. It was Dr. Mason, the neurosurgeon responsible for Marina's case. "We need to talk," he said, his voice urgent. "Now." Gabriel ran through the hospital corridors, his heart beating uncontrollably. When he arrived at Dr. Mason's office, he found an entire team of doctors waiting. "What happened?" he asked, bracing himself for the worst. "Has she gotten worse?" "No," Dr. Mason said, and there was something akin to surprise in his voice. "In fact, she's improved significantly. Her brain functions are stabilizing faster than we expected, and the baby is also responding well." Gabriel felt his knees buckle with relief. "So she's going to wake up?" "We're planning to gradually reduce the sedation. If all goes well, she may regain consciousness in the next few days." "But Gabriel," Dr. Mason placed a hand on his shoulder, "you need to understand that we don't know what her mental state will be when she wakes up. The trauma was significant, both physical and what she experienced before falling. She's going to need a lot of support." "She'll have it," Gabriel promised. "Everything she needs, for as long as she needs it." As doctors worked to gradually wake Marina, the outside world remained in turmoil. Richard's bail hearing was denied, the judge citing flight risk and potential for witness intimidation. Charlotte would also remain imprisoned, now in a psychiatric ward, where she received treatment for her mental breakdown while awaiting trial. And then on the morning of the 7th day after the attack, it happened. Gabriel was by Marina's bedside, holding her hand, when he saw her fingers twitch slightly. "Marina," he called, his voice barely a whisper. "Marina, can you hear me?" Marina's eyes moved under her closed lids. Then, slowly, miraculously, they opened. Marina's first moments of consciousness were confused, lights too bright, muffled sounds that gradually became clearer, the sensation of tubes in her throat, something uncomfortable that made her want to cough, but couldn't. And then a familiar face. Gabriel. Her brother was there, holding her hand, tears streaming freely down his face as he called for doctors. Marina tried to speak, but the breathing tube prevented her. She tried to raise her hand to touch him, but her muscles seemed not to respond properly. Panic began to set in. Where was she? What had happened? And then, like an overwhelming wave, everything came back. The steps, Charlotte, the fall, and her baby. Her baby. Marina's eyes widened in terror, and her hands flew to her belly. Gabriel understood immediately. "The baby is fine," he said quickly, placing his own hands over hers. "Marina, the baby is fine. You are pregnant. The baby is alive and healthy." Doctors and nurses swarmed the room, checking vital signs, asking basics questions. Marina squeezed her fingers, blinked in response, did everything she could to show she was there, that she was conscious. When they finally removed the breathing tube, her first word was hoarse but clear. "Baby." "Your baby is fine," a doctor repeated, placing a monitor on Marina's belly. "Hear that? Those are your child's heartbeats, strong and regular." Marina closed her eyes as she listened to the rhythmic sound of the baby's heart. Tears of relief streamed down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, God." The following days were of gradual but painful physical recovery. Marina had to relearn to stand, to walk short distances supported by nurses. Her body had suffered immense trauma, and although there were no severe permanent damages, the pain was constant. But Marina didn't complain. She was alive. Her baby was alive. Everything else was secondary. Gabriel was always there, a constant pillar of support. He told her everything that had happened while she was unconscious, about the demonstrations, about the evidence Beatrice had uncovered, about the charges against Richard and Charlotte. Marina listened to everything in silence, processing each piece of information with a calm that surprised even Gabriel. "I always knew," Marina finally said, her voice still weak but firm. "Not about Charlotte specifically, but I knew there was someone. I knew Richard was drifting away. I just chose to ignore it. I chose to believe the baby would change things." "Marina, none of this is your fault," Gabriel said vehemently. "Nothing that happened was your responsibility." "I know," Marina replied, looking directly at him. "And that's why I'm going to testify. I'm going to tell the truth about everything. About the marriage, about what I felt that day, about the words Charlotte said. They need to answer for what they did." It was when Marina had been in the hospital for 2 weeks, already able to walk on her own and with imminent medical discharge, that she asked for something that worried Gabriel. She wanted to record a video testimony, not just testimony for court, but a public statement about her experience. "Marina, you don't have to do this," Gabriel argued. "Your formal testimony is enough. You don't need to expose yourself more than you already have been." But Marina was unyielding. "I do need to. Because it's not just about me, Gabriel. It's about all the women who go through this and are silenced, all who are manipulated, betrayed, attacked, and then have their voices stolen by men who use power and influence to control the narrative. I have a platform now, even if I didn't ask for it, and I'm going to use it." Beatrice Maxwell was the one who helped Marina record the video. They sat together in a quiet room at the hospital, just the camera, the journalist, and Marina. There would be no editing. There would be no script. Just the raw truth of a woman who almost lost everything. "My name is Marina Kensington," she began, her voice calm but laden with emotion, "and I wanted to be here today to talk about what happened to me, but also about what happens to thousands of women every day in this country." She paused, taking a deep breath. "For 5 years I was married to Richard Kensington. To the world we were the perfect couple. But behind closed doors I lived with a man who saw me as an accessory, a political tool, something that could be discarded when no longer useful." Marina recounted her story with painful details. She spoke about the signs she ignored, about the times Richard made her doubt her own sanity, about how he systematically isolated her from friends and even from Gabriel during the early years of their marriage. She spoke about the day of the attack, about Charlotte's words, about Richard's silence as everything unfolded. "When I fell down those steps," Marina said, her voice breaking for the first time, "I wasn't just falling physically. I was falling from all the illusions I had built about my life. And as I fell, all I could think about was my baby. What kind of world was I bringing this child into? A world where powerful men can destroy women without consequences?" She looked directly into the camera. "No, I refuse to accept that. I refuse to be silenced. If I cannot speak on behalf of all who came before me, then let my pain speak for me." The video was shown in court during the trial, 3 weeks after Marina was discharged from the hospital. The courtroom was packed, with journalists from all over the country and even international ones present. Cameras broadcast live to millions of viewers. Gabriel represented Marina legally, using special leave given the extraordinary circumstances of the case. Richard sat at the defense table, his suit impeccable but his face showing the signs of stress from the past few weeks. He had lost weight, developed deep circles under his eyes, and his posture, which had once been arrogant, was now that of a defeated man. Charlotte was at a separate table, still fragile, her lawyer beside her holding her hand. When Marina's video was played, the room fell into absolute silence. The only sound was her voice coming from the loudspeakers, telling her story with brutal honesty. Some jurors openly wept. Even the judge had to pause to wipe his glasses, clearly moved. After the video, Gabriel presented all the meticulously collected evidence, the security camera footage, showing Richard talking to Charlotte before the attack, the recovered text messages, detailing the plan to destroy Marina's reputation, the financial records proving the embezzlement of funds from the Domestic Violence Prevention Foundation, and the devastating audio where Charlotte repeated Richard's words. The defense tried to argue that Charlotte had acted alone, that Richard was innocent of any conspiracy. But the evidence was too overwhelming. Witnesses were called: the security guard who provided the audio, Beatrice, who explained how she uncovered the information, even former employees of Richard's, who testified about his manipulative behavior and his constant lies. The most tense moment came when a jury member revealed that he had been approached by an associate of Richard's, offering money in exchange for a not guilty vote. The judge immediately halted the trial, ordering a full investigation. The man who tried to bribe the juror was arrested right there in the courtroom, and Richard was charged with a new series of offenses. Throughout the process, Marina was present in the gallery, her belly now prominent with 8 months of pregnancy. She didn't take her eyes off Richard, forcing him to confront what he had done. Several times he tried to look in her direction, but always averted his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. Charlotte was called to testify. She took the witness stand, trembling, her hands nervously clasped. When asked about the events of that day, she finally told everything: how Richard had seduced her with promises of a future together, how he gradually convinced her that Marina was the problem, an obstacle that needed to be removed, how he suggested the public confrontation, saying it would just be a show to force Marina to accept a separation. He said she would lose her balance on her own, Charlotte testified, tears streaming down her face. He said she was fragile, that the public shock would be enough. But when I got there, when I saw her, I realized he never intended to be with me. I was just a tool. And in that moment of realization, I completely lost control. "And do you take responsibility for your actions?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes," Charlotte replied, her voice firm despite the tears. "What I did was terrible. No matter how much manipulation there was, in the end, I was the one who pushed her. I was the one who hurt her, and I will carry that for the rest of my life." When it was time for closing statements, Gabriel stood up and walked to the center of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice filling the space, "this case is about more than a physical attack. It's about a man who used his power, his position, and his influence to systematically destroy the woman he swore to love and protect. It's about a woman who was manipulated until she became a weapon against another innocent woman." The courtroom was so silent that one could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. The jurors had deliberated for only 4 hours, a surprisingly short time for a case of such complexity, but the evidence was irrefutable, and the story it told was crystal clear. When they returned to the room, their faces were grim but determined. Marina sat in the front row of the gallery, Gabriel by her side holding her hand. She was in her 36th week of pregnancy now, the baby, potentially due at any moment. Doctors had recommended she avoid situations of intense stress, but Marina had insisted on being present for the verdict. She needed to be there. She needed to see with her own eyes the outcome of that nightmare. The judge, a 60-year-old man with a long career known for impartiality and firmness, adjusted his glasses and looked at the jurors. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor." The jury foreman stood up holding a sheet of paper with steady hands. "In the case of the State versus Charlotte Norton, regarding the charge of aggravated assault, we find the defendant guilty." A murmur swept through the room. Charlotte closed her eyes, silent tears streaming down her face. Her lawyer placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, but there was nothing to say. Justice had spoken. "And in the case of the State versus Richard Kensington," the foreman continued, his voice growing firmer, "regarding the charges of obstruction of justice, manipulation of information, psychological violence and embezzlement of public funds, we find the defendant guilty on all counts." This time the murmur turned into a louder noise. Some applauded, others wept. Marina simply closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of weeks of tension finally beginning to dissipate. Gabriel squeezed her hand harder, and when she opened her eyes, she saw tears of relief on his face. Richard remained seated, his face a mask of shock. He looked at his lawyer as if expecting her to do something, say something that would change the outcome. But there was nothing to do. The jury had decided, and the decision was unanimous. The judge struck his gavel. Silence in the court. He waited until everyone was quiet before continuing. Before proceeding with the sentence, I would like to make a few remarks. He removed his glasses and looked directly at Richard. Mr. Kensington, you occupied a position of public trust. You were elected to represent and serve the people of this state, but instead you used your power to deceive, manipulate, and cause harm to an innocent woman. Worse still, you did so while embezzling funds from an organization dedicated to helping victims of domestic violence. Your hypocrisy is as profound as your cruelty. Richard lowered his head, unable to face the judge's words. Beside him, his lawyer remained silent. There was no defense against the truth. The judge turned to Charlotte. Ms. Norton, you also played a role in this tragedy. Although I acknowledge that you were manipulated, that your actions were influenced by false promises and emotional exploitation, you made choices, and those choices almost took 2 lives. Charlotte nodded, wiping her tears. I know, Your Honor, and I regret it every day. The judge put his glasses back on and consulted the documents before him. Therefore, I sentence Charlotte Norton to 8 years in prison for aggravated assault, with the possibility of parole after 4 years, conditional on good behavior and completion of mandatory psychological treatment. He paused before continuing. And I sentence Richard Kensington to 12 years in prison for obstruction of justice, manipulation of information, psychological violence, and embezzlement of public funds, without possibility of parole before 8 years. Furthermore, I order full restitution of all embezzled funds and permanent ineligibility for public office. The gavel struck again, echoing through the room like a gunshot. It is done. Take the convicted away. As Richard was led away by bailiffs, he finally looked at Marina. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Marina saw no remorse there. She saw no regret. She saw only a man who had been caught, who had lost everything, and who blamed the entire world except himself for his downfall. Marina held his gaze until he was forced to turn away and leave the room. Only then did she allow the tears to come. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of closure, of finally being able to start moving forward. Outside the courthouse, hundreds of people waited. When Gabriel and Marina emerged, an explosion of applause and shouts of support greeted them. Yellow ribbons were everywhere on people's clothes, tied to trees, hanging from lampposts. Marina stopped at the top of the courthouse steps, the same position where she had fallen weeks ago in another place, and looked at the crowd. Gabriel was by her side, ready to give a prepared statement, but Marina gently touched his arm. "Let me speak," she asked. Gabriel nodded and stepped aside. Marina stepped forward, and the crowd instantly fell silent, waiting to hear her words. "Thank you," Marina began, her voice amplified by microphones the journalists had quickly extended. "Thank you to each of you who stood by me during these difficult days, who wore yellow, who marched, who refused to let my story be silenced." She placed a hand on her belly. "But I want you to know that this is not the end. It is the beginning of a conversation we need to have as a society about violence, manipulation, and the abuse of power." The crowd remained in absolute silence, every word of Marina's being absorbed. "In the coming months, I will be working with women's rights organizations to create a foundation dedicated to helping women who have gone through what I went through, who were manipulated, controlled, hurt by men who should have loved them." Marina looked directly into the cameras. "And to all the men watching this, know that you also have a role. You need to be part of the solution. You need to challenge the culture that allows this to happen. You need to do better." The applause was deafening. Marina descended the steps carefully, Gabriel by her side in case she needed support. But she didn't need it. She walked with her head held high with dignity, proving that although she had fallen, she had risen, stronger. 3 months later, Marina gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Sophia, which means wisdom. Sophia was born on the exact day that marked 1 year since the attack, as if the universe were offering a new beginning precisely when the old one had ended. Gabriel was in the delivery room, holding Marina's hand throughout labor. When Sophia finally arrived, crying loudly and strongly, Gabriel cried too. "This girl," he said, holding his niece for the first time, "this girl will grow up knowing her mother is a warrior." Marina looked at her daughter at that tiny life she had fought so hard to protect. "She will grow up knowing that justice exists," Marina replied, "and that it's never too late to fight for what is right." The Phoenix Foundation was officially inaugurated 1 year after the attack, on Sophia's first birthday. The ceremony took place on the same steps where Marina had fallen, now transformed into a memorial. Bronze plaques told the story of what had happened there, and on the 5th step, where Marina had hit her head, there was a sculpture of a golden phoenix rising from the ashes. Marina ascended those steps, again this time carrying Sophia in her arms. The little girl, with her curious eyes and brown hair like her mother's, looked around with fascination. Gabriel walked behind them, always vigilant, always protective. At the top of the steps, Marina turned to the gathered crowd. "A year ago I fell here," she said, her voice echoing through the loudspeakers. "I fell literally, and I fell symbolically, but in this very place where I almost lost everything, now I rise. I rise with all the women who have been silenced, who have been hurt, who have been forced to carry pain, in silence." She looked at Sophia. "This foundation isn't just about providing refuge and legal support, although we do that. It's about giving a voice to the voiceless. It's about creating a world where my daughter never has to go through what I went through." The crowd erupted in applause. Among them was Beatrice, who continued investigating cases of violence and abuse of power. There was Charles, the security guard who provided the crucial audio, now working as the Foundation's security coordinator. There were hundreds of women who saw their own story reflected in Marina's and found the courage to leave abusive situations. After the ceremony, Marina descended the steps again with Sophia. On the 5th step, she paused and laid yellow flowers, a tradition that had begun spontaneously and was now carried out every year. Sophia reached out her tiny hand and touched the flowers, laughing. "She will know," Gabriel said beside Marina. "When she's older, we'll tell her. Not as a story of trauma, but as a story of survival, of strength." Marina nodded, watching Sophia play with the flower petals. "She will know that in this very place where her mother fell, hope now exists. That from suffering something good was born. That justice may be slow, but when it arrives it blossoms." The London sun shone brightly that day, warming the marble steps that had witnessed so much suffering, but now represented renewal. The city continued its bustling routine around them, but in that space, at that moment, there was peace. There was healing. There was a future. Marina lifted Sophia into her arms and spun her around, making the little girl laugh with pure, innocent joy. The sound of that laughter echoed down the steps, forever replacing the memory of screams and tears with something new, with hope, with life. And as Gabriel watched his sister and niece, he knew that justice had not only been served, justice had blossomed exactly where before there had only been pain. And a new generation was growing, a generation that would learn early on that silence is never the answer, that truth always finds its way, and that from the darkest place the brightest light can emerge. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Marina, Gabriel, and Sophia has deeply touched your hearts. This journey has shown us that even in the most difficult moments, when all seems lost, there is strength within us to rise again. Marina transformed her pain into purpose, and her courage inspired an entire country to no longer accept silence in the face of injustice. If this story moved you, imagine how many other incredible stories are waiting to be discovered. We have a special playlist full of narratives that will make you laugh, cry, and reflect on life. Find it by clicking here to the side and prepare for a journey of emotions. If Marina and her fight for justice touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Every day we bring unique stories that explore not only the challenges, but also the incredible resilience of the human spirit. And we want to hear from you. What part of Marina's story resonated with you the most? Her strength as a mother, Gabriel's dedication as a brother, or perhaps the way an entire community united for a cause? Share your thoughts in the comments. We look forward to seeing you there to continue this conversation about justice, love, and new beginnings together. Until the next story.